Ethan had never thought his life would lead him so far from home. He grew up in a small city on Earth, living a simple life. But everything changed after the humans and the Lyrans made peace. When the chance came to work as a servant in the palace of the Lyran royal family, Ethan took it, hoping to see new worlds and maybe send some money back to his family. Now, every morning he woke up in a small room with a window looking out over bright, strange towers that seemed to glow with their own soft light. The city was always filled with soft music and gentle colors. The sky was a bright, endless purple, and the air felt cool and clean most days. Ethan wore a plain gray uniform and moved quietly through the palace. He learned quickly that humans were seen as new and different here. Many of the Lyran nobles looked past him, treating him as just another worker. Even so, Ethan tried his best to be polite, helpful, and careful. He swept the marble halls, carried fresh fruit from the kitchen, and dusted the tall, shining windows. He kept his head down, never making a fuss, because he knew it was best not to stand out. The palace was the most beautiful place he had ever seen. There were wide gardens with flowers that glowed blue and silver, pools of still water, and trees with white leaves that sang softly in the wind. The Lyran nobles walked these halls with flowing robes and quiet steps. Sometimes they talked about far-off stars and old traditions that Ethan didn't understand. He felt out of place, but he worked hard. Even if nobody thanked him, he felt proud of what he did. Ethan quickly learned the rules of the palace. He knew when to bow, when to speak, and when to be silent. The other human servants were friendly, but everyone knew it was best to stay out of trouble. They shared quiet smiles and short stories about home during breaks. Life was simple but safe, and Ethan tried not to wish for more. Sometimes, when he was working in the gardens, he saw Princess Illyra walking by. She was the daughter of the queen and was always surrounded by her advisors and guards. She had pale blue skin that seemed to shine, long silver hair, and large, gentle eyes. She looked graceful and wise, and Ethan always kept his distance, watching only for a moment before returning to his chores. Ethan never spoke to her, but he could tell she noticed him. Sometimes she would pause for a second as she walked past, looking at him with a soft, curious gaze. He wondered what she thought, but he never expected her to say anything to him. To the Lyrans, humans were still outsiders, and he was just a servant. Still, it made him nervous every time she looked his way. One morning, as Ethan carried a basket of fruit through a long hallway, he heard laughter and music coming from the grand hall. There was going to be a feast, and the servants were busy making everything perfect. Ethan worked extra hard, cleaning every corner and arranging flowers just as the head servant showed him. The palace was filled with sweet smells and excitement, and everyone hurried to finish their work before the guests arrived. As the evening sun set, the feast began. Ethan and the other servants stood by the walls, ready to serve food and drinks. He watched the Lyran nobles laugh and talk, their voices calm and musical. The queen sat at the head of the table, with Princess Illyra by her side. Ethan moved quietly, from guest to guest, refilling cups and making sure everything was perfect. He tried not to make a mistake, knowing how important this night was for everyone. Suddenly, as he was pouring a drink for a tall noble, his hand slipped and the cup fell, spilling sweet blue juice onto the floor near the queen's chair. For a second, everything went silent. Ethan felt his heart freeze. He quickly knelt to clean it up, feeling the eyes of the whole room on him. He was sure he would be punished or at least shouted at. Instead, someone knelt beside him and started helping him wipe the floor. He looked up and saw Princess Illyra. She gave him a gentle smile and whispered, "It's all right." She helped him clean the spill quickly and then stood up, telling the queen it was just an accident. The queen nodded and the music started again. Ethan felt a wave of relief and gratitude. He had never expected the princess herself to help him. The other servants looked surprised too, and Ethan saw respect in their eyes. After the feast, Ethan found himself thinking about Princess Illyra's kindness. She did not have to help him, but she did. He wondered why. He returned to his small room that night feeling a little less lonely and a little more hopeful. For the first time since coming to the palace, he felt that maybe things could change. Maybe, just maybe, someone important saw him for who he really was. The morning after the feast, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. He could still remember the look in Princess Allura's eyes when she smiled at him. He kept thinking about how she had helped him and spoken up for him in front of everyone. The memory made him nervous and happy at the same time. He got dressed and hurried to start his work, trying not to think too much about what had happened the night before. The palace halls were quiet as the sun rose over the city. Ethan swept the floors and cleaned the tables, but his mind was full of questions. Would the princes remember him today? Would the other nobles or servants treat him differently? He hoped that everything would go back to normal, but he also hoped that maybe, somehow, his life would change for the better as the day went on. Ethan noticed some of the other servants looking at him and whispering. They seemed surprised by the princess's actions at the feast. One of the older servants, a kind woman named Lily, patted Ethan on the shoulder and told him that he had handled himself well. Not everyone gets help from a princess, she said with a smile. Ethan thanked her, but he was still unsure about what it all meant. Late in the afternoon, while Ethan was tending to the flowers in the palace gardens, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw Princess Allura walking toward him. She was alone, without her usual guards or advisors. Ethan felt his heart beat faster, but he kept working, pretending not to notice her. "Hello, Ethan," Allura said softly. Her voice was kind, and there was no sign of anger or pride. Ethan stood up and bowed, feeling awkward. He had never been this close to her before, except during the accident at the feast. "Good afternoon, Princess," he replied quietly. Allura looked around the garden and then at Ethan. "May I ask you something?" she said. Ethan nodded and she smiled. "I want to know about your home. What is Earth like?" Ethan was surprised by her question, but he was happy to answer. He told her about green fields, blue oceans, and the warm sun on his face. He talked about his family and how people on Earth like to laugh and share stories. Allura listened closely, her eyes full of interest. She asked about simple things, how humans cooked food, what children played, and how families lived together. They walked slowly among the glowing flowers as Ethan talked. He tried to explain everything in a way that made sense. Allura laughed at some of his stories and asked even more questions. For the first time, Ethan felt like he was talking to a friend and not just a royal person. He forgot for a while that he was only a servant. As the sky turned a deep purple and the first stars appeared, Allura thanked Ethan for sharing his stories. "I like hearing about your world," she said. "You are very different from what I was told about humans." Ethan smiled, feeling a little shy. "I'm just an ordinary person," he said. "To me, you are not ordinary," Allura replied gently. Then she turned and left the garden, leaving Ethan standing among the flowers, lost in thought. That night, Ethan found it hard to sleep. He thought about everything he had told the princess. He wondered if he had said too much or if he had broken any rules by talking so freely. But deep inside he felt proud. He had shown Allura a piece of his world, and she had listened. The next day, word spread among the servants that the princes had spoken to Ethan in the garden. Some were curious, while others were jealous or worried. Lily told him to be careful, as not everyone liked to see a human getting special attention. Ethan promised he would be careful, but he knew that something important had changed. Over the next week, Ethan and Allura met more often. Sometimes she would find him in the gardens, other times in the quiet halls of the palace. She always had new questions, and Ethan was happy to answer. They talked about Earth and Lyra, about dreams, hopes, and fears. Ethan learned that Allura was not as perfect or powerful as she seemed. She sometimes felt lonely and wished for a friend who understood her. One afternoon, while Ethan was carrying fresh fruit to the queen's chambers, a group of Lorraine nobles passed by. They stopped and whispered to each other, looking at Ethan with cold eyes. One of them, a young noble named Differen, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Careful, human. You seem to think you are special now. Remember your place." Ethan lowered his eyes and kept walking, but inside he felt a mix of anger and fear. He did not want trouble, and he did not want the princes to get into trouble because of him. That evening, Allura found Ethan alone in the gardens. She could see he was upset. She asked him what had happened, and Ethan told her about the nobles. Words. Illyra looked angry for a moment, but then she smiled gently. "Let them talk," she said. "You have done nothing wrong. I choose who I spend my time with." Ethan was grateful for her support. He promised himself that he would keep doing his best, no matter what others said. That night, as the city lights glowed in the distance, Ethan looked out his window and thought about his new life. He felt hope growing in his heart. The princess had noticed him, and she saw more in him than just a servant. Maybe, he thought, things would never be the same again. Days passed and palace life went on quietly. Ethan worked hard every day. He learned many things about Lyran customs. He was careful not to make mistakes. But he could not stop thinking about Princess Illyra. Her kindness made him hopeful. One morning, Ethan was putting flowers in the grand hall. He heard soft footsteps behind him. It was Princess Illyra. She held a small book. "I found this book in the library," she said with a smile. "It has stories about Earth. Would you read too?" "Me?" Ethan was happy and surprised. He took the book and sat by the window with Illyra. The sunlight made the room warm. Ethan read stories about Earth's rivers, mountains, and cities. Illyra listened closely. She asked many questions about the people and places they laughed about. Strange animals and beautiful sights. They met every day after that. Illyra and Ethan shared quiet moments together. Illyra told Ethan about her life and her worries. She said being future queen made her lonely. Ethan talked about his simple dreams. Illyra listened with care, but some nobles were unhappy. They whispered and watched Ethan closely. They did not like a human being close to the royal family. Vareen, a young noble, warned others to watch Ethan. One day, Vareen spoke to Ethan in the library. He said, "You are lucky the princess likes you. But remember, you must stay in your place here." Ethan stayed calm. He said, "I understand." Later, Illyra found Ethan in the garden. She saw he was worried. She took his hand and said, "Do not be afraid. You belong with me." Ethan felt warm inside. He looked at Illyra's eyes and saw trust. For the first time he felt he belonged. Their friendship grew stronger. The queen asked Illyra about Ethan. Illyra told her about her respect and friendship. The queen listened quietly. One night, there was a celebration for the peace treaty. Nobles wore bright clothes and jewels. Ethan worked quietly but felt confident. Illyra found him and took his arm. She led him to the garden. Under the stars, Illyra said softly, "Ethan, you are more than a servant to me. You are my friend and equal." Ethan was surprised and happy. He smiled and said, "Thank you for believing in me." Illyra smiled and kissed his hand. "We will face challenges, but together we can change how people see humans and Lyrans." Ethan felt brave. Together they walked back to the palace, but danger was near. Some nobles planned to stop their friendship. Ethan knew his life was changing. He was ready to fight for it. Ethan woke up to a quiet palace that felt different than before. The air was filled with tension. Rumors had spread about his closeness to Princess Illyra. Some nobles whispered that he was not just a servant but someone who wanted power. Ethan tried to ignore the voices and focus on his work. He did not want to cause trouble. That day a great crisis struck the palace. An important artifact, a glowing crystal that held the history of the Lyran people, went missing. The queen was furious, and guards searched every room. Whispers turned to accusations. Many looked at Ethan with suspicion. After all, he was new and human, easy to blame. Ethan was taken to a cold room beneath the palace. The guards questioned him harshly. He told the truth, but no one seemed to listen. Fear and confusion filled his heart. He thought of Illyra and hoped she would believe in him. Meanwhile, Illyra was furious when she heard of Ethan's arrest. She went to the queen and demanded justice. "He is innocent," Illyra said. "I trust him. Find the real thief." The queen looked at her daughter and then nodded slowly. She ordered a secret investigation to prove Ethan's innocence. Illyra began her own search. She went through palace records and questioned servants and nobles. She watched their faces closely, looking for signs of guilt. Days passed, and Illyra never gave up. She believed in Ethan's honesty and wanted to clear his name. Finally, Illyra discovered the truth. The real thief was a jealous noble who wanted to disgrace the royal family. Illyra gathered evidence and brought it to the queen. The queen listened carefully and then announced Ethan's innocence. The guards released him immediately. Ethan felt relief and gratitude. He bowed deeply to Illyra, thanking her for saving him. The princess smiled and said, "You showed courage even when no one believed you." After the crisis, Ethan's place in the palace changed. Many nobles began to respect him. They saw how Illyra stood by him and how he kept his honor. Ethan was no longer just a servant. He was a symbol of honesty and strength. Illyra invited Ethan to join her during important events. They spoke openly and shared laughter. Some nobles still disapproved, but the queen watched carefully and allowed the friendship to grow. Ethan realized Illyra cared for him deeply, not as a servant but as a true companion. One evening, under the stars in the palace garden, Illyra told Ethan, "I want you by my side, not as a servant but as my partner." Ethan was surprised but felt his heart fill with joy. He accepted her offer and promised to stand with her always. Together, they faced challenges from those who opposed their bond. But their friendship and trust were strong. Ethan, once only a servant, had become a symbol of unity between two worlds. His courage and kindness had changed everything. Ethan began to feel a new strength inside him. After the crisis with the missing artifact, his place in the palace had changed a lot. The nobles who once ignored him now looked at him with respect. They saw how Princess Illyra stood by him, and that made many think twice. Even though some were still unhappy, Ethan did not care. He had Illyra's trust, and that was enough. Illyra invited Ethan to join her in many palace events. He walked beside her in the grand halls, and people whispered as they passed. Some nobles tried to ignore them, but others gave them curious looks. Ethan felt proud but also a little nervous. He was still a human among Lyrans, but Illyra treated him like an equal. During one important event, the queen herself spoke to Ethan. She told him that she saw his good heart and bravery. The queen said that humans and Lyrans could learn much from each other. Ethan bowed and thanked her. He knew this was a big step for him and all humans. Illyra and Ethan spent more time together. They talked about many things, the future of their worlds, hopes for peace, and even simple joys like music and food. Illyra loved to hear about Earth, and Ethan enjoyed learning about Lyran traditions. Their friendship grew deeper every day. One day, as they walked through the palace gardens, Illyra stopped and looked at Ethan. She smiled softly and said, "You have changed my life. Ethan, I want you to stay by my side, not as a servant, but as my partner." Ethan was surprised. He never thought this could happen. His heart beat fast, and he smiled back. "I will stay with you," he said. Not everyone accepted their bond easily. Some nobles whispered behind closed doors and planned to stop them. They said it was not right for a human to be so close to the princess. Ethan heard the rumors but stayed strong. Illyra stood by him, and that gave him courage. Together, they faced challenges from those who did not want change. Illyra used her royal power to protect Ethan. The queen also supported her daughter's choice. Slowly, the palace began to accept their friendship and respect it. Ethan and Illyra's story became a symbol of hope. Humans and Lyrans started to work more closely. Old fears began to fade, replaced by trust and friendship. Ethan, once only a servant, showed that kindness and courage could break down walls between worlds. As the years passed, Ethan and Illyra grew closer. Their bond was strong and true. They dreamed of a future where all beings, no matter their origin, could live in peace and respect. Together they made that future possible, one step at a time. Ethan and Illyra faced many challenges together, but their bond only grew stronger. The palace was no longer a place of cold whispers, but one where hope began to bloom. Their friendship had shown both humans and Lyrans that different worlds could come together in peace. The queen gave her full support to Illyra's choice. She saw the good in Ethan and how he treated her daughter with respect and kindness. The other nobles, slowly but surely, began to accept Ethan. Some were still doubtful, But the power of the princess's trust was stronger than their fears. Illyra and Ethan worked to build bridges between their peoples. They organized events where humans and Lyrans could meet and learn about each other's cultures. They spoke openly about the past and dreamed of a future where all beings lived without hate or suspicion. Ethan felt proud to be part of this new era. He remembered the day he first arrived as a servant, feeling small and unseen. Now he stood beside the princes as an equal. He knew that courage and kindness had changed his life and many others. One evening, under a sky filled with stars, Illyra took Ethan's hand. She looked into his eyes and said, "We have come far, but our journey is just beginning. Together we will face whatever comes next." Ethan smiled and nodded. "I am ready. With you I am never alone." Their love and partnership became a symbol across both worlds. People spoke of the human who was once a servant and the alien princes who saw him differently. Their story inspired others to open their hearts and minds. Years later, Ethan and Illyra stood before a crowd of humans and Lyrans, united in celebration. They had built a new future, one where all were welcome and valued. Their journey had started with kindness and courage, and it continued with hope and love. Ethan knew he was no longer just a servant. He was a bridge between worlds, a symbol of what could be when people looked beyond differences. Together with Illyra, he would keep working for peace, friendship, and a better tomorrow.